In today's story, we're going to be talking about a true crime obsession that would lead one woman to commit an unspeakable act. For the vast majority of people consuming true crime content, it's rather harmless and, for the most part, does serve an educational value. However, in May of 2023, a young South Korean woman's interest in the subject would turn into a deadly obsession. The line between reality and obsession quickly became blurred for this woman, leading her to meticulously plan and execute a heinous crime inspired by the cases she studied. The brutality of this crime sent shockwaves throughout the community, and authorities would launch an investigation to uncover the truth behind this unforgivable crime. And this investigation would reveal to the world the shocking truth behind this one woman's descent into darkness. Hi guys, and welcome. I am finally back to filming after a long month off, and as you guys can probably see, I'm in a new filming corner, and I'm still trying to figure out whether or not I like it here or not in this little corner, but we'll see once I edit the video and see how everything looks, basically. But anyways, hi, welcome. This is Crime Corner with Jen, and for those of you who don't know, my name is Jen, and I talk about true crime cases on this channel. Before we jump into today's story, please be sure to like, subscribe, and to turn on the notification bell so that you can keep up with all of my future uploads. The Jung Yoo Jung case has emerged as one of the most sensational true crime stories of 2023. And it all really started with one individual's fascination with true crime that would quickly spiral into a living nightmare. But what exactly led to this drastic turn of events? Well, let's find out. Today's story takes us to the southern coast of Korea in a city called Busan. And yes, this is the same Busan from the 2016 film Train to Busan. Side note, it's one of the best zombie horror movies I've ever watched. I swear I've watched it like maybe 3 or 4 times. So if you're a fan of the horror genre, then I highly recommend this movie. Busan houses about 3.4 million people and is considered to be South Korea's southern economic center. The city and South Korea in general is known to be very safe to live in, so this is one of the reasons why it was so shocking to the community when news of what happened came out, and also why it garnered so much international attention. So in the early morning of May 27th, 2023, at about 3 a.m., a concerned taxi driver would make a call to authorities stating that he had just completed a ride for a customer. He had been flagged down on the road by a young woman carrying a suitcase who would ask the driver to drop her off in a wooded area in the Nakdong riverside. Initially, he didn't sense anything off about the young woman, and he was happy to make this drive because he was familiar with the route and had driven it many times. But things would take a concerning turn when the driver and the passenger would arrive at the destination. While the driver was helping the young woman to remove her suitcase from the back of the taxi's trunk, the driver noticed that there was some sort of red substance leaking out of the suitcase. And when he got a little bit closer to look at what that red substance could be, he found that it looked a lot like blood. Now, the young woman at this point didn't seem to notice that there was anything wrong or that there was anything leaking from her suitcase, and she also didn't notice the concerned look on the driver's face. Not wanting to cause a confrontation with this young woman, the driver just pretended like he didn't see anything and pretended like there was nothing wrong. So he gave the young woman her suitcase and then watched as the young woman would walk into the forest and disappear. After the young woman disappeared into the wooded area, the driver would again open up his trunk and he would take a closer look with his flashlight at the red substance in his trunk, and he was convinced that this was blood. He's now certain that whatever was in that young woman's suitcase could not have been good. The driver becomes pretty spooked here and he immediately calls the police. He tells the police that he's concerned because he's just dropped a young woman off in this wooded area and she's carrying a suitcase with her at 3 a.m. into the woods, and the suitcase was leaking blood in his taxi's trunk. The authorities tell him, okay, hang tight, we're gonna meet you there and we're gonna check it out. Now, when the authorities arrived to the wooded area where the young woman had been dropped off, it would only take them a few minutes to find what the young woman had left there. Dumped in the dark and shrouded area, the authorities would find the mutilated remains of a person. Luckily, because the driver had been the one to drop the young woman with the suitcase off and had seen her face, he was able to work with the authorities to help them identify who she was. The authorities would come to learn that the young woman's name was Jung Yoo Jung. Now, you're probably wondering how the authorities were able to so quickly identify Yoo Jung, and this is because the taxi driver had cooperated with the authorities and had given them information about exactly where he had picked Yoo Jung up from before heading to their destination. And with that information, the authorities were able to access surveillance footage from around that area, and from the footage, she was very easy to spot. She was the only young woman walking down the street at 3 a.m. with a suitcase. And then once they had that footage, data analysts were able to quickly identify her name as Jung Yoo Jung. And with all the evidence stacked up against Yoo Jung at this point, it made for a pretty easy arrest. Now, with the arrest made and the news shared with the public, many people began to ask, who is Jung Yoo Jung? And why did she commit this horrible crime? During my research, I found it pretty difficult to find a lot of information about Yoo Jung's personal background. However, I do know that she was born in 1999 and was about 23 years old at the time of the crime. I also know that while growing up, Yoo Jung didn't get to spend a lot of time with her parents. Both were really busy working and trying to afford a good life for her. So she did spend the majority of her childhood being raised by her grandfather in Bakgu, which is a district in northern Busan. And during her high school years, Yoo Jung was enrolled in an all-girls private school, and she was described by her peers as somebody who was very shy and a little bit peculiar. She apparently didn't have a lot of friends at school and spent most of her time alone. However, it seems like this was more of her choice than anybody else's because, for one, she wasn't bullied at school, and two, she was the one who didn't have any interest in making any friends in the school and didn't have any interest in talking to any of her classmates. Honestly, from what I've read, it sounds like she really didn't have a problem spending time alone. She was very content being alone and just doing her own thing. Some of her former classmates have even stated that during their studies together, they would try to approach her and to speak to her, and all she would do was just stare at them and not say anything back. It was weird, basically. And eventually, people just stopped trying to open up conversations with her and trying to build a friendship with her. And once she graduated from high school, she never once made an effort to get in touch with any of her classmates, and she completely lost touch with everybody from the school. And during those 5 years, she was actually preparing for her civil service exam, which is required in South Korea for anyone who wants to work in the civil service industry. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this, South Korea has a really interesting work culture. In South Korea, just because you've graduated from high school or from university, it does not mean that your education ends there. Many South Korean employers really value and even require that their employees continue to learn and are constantly improving in order to maintain their jobs or to even get promotions. So this means that many companies in Korea require their employees throughout their employment to go through regular exams to test their skills and knowledge within their specific fields, and performance is heavily monitored. Those who pass the civil service exam have access to better pay as well as special welfare rights and more opportunities. However, this exam does require that you speak, read, and write English competently, and this was something that Yoo Jung struggled with. She struggled with the English language, and because of this, she wasn't really able to move forward with the exam because she just was so stuck on this one part of the exam. After Yoo Jung graduated and throughout her unemployment, it seemed like she became even more of a hermit. She reportedly rarely left her home, never made an effort to create a social circle or to even see more of the world or even more of her own city. Instead, she spent all of her time in her apartment consuming true crime content. And I believe that her being such a recluse and perhaps even getting lonely at some points was a huge factor in her state of mind and why she would do what she did. So when a search warrant was eventually issued for Yoo Jung's home, the authorities would head over there and they would find a number of interesting things about the young woman. In her home, she had dozens of books about true crime cases. Now I'm talking about novels about murders, about old true crime cases, old serial killers, all the works. And when the authorities looked through Yoo Jung's YouTube account as well as through her television to see what sort of stuff was on there, they would find that the only entertainment she consumed was content from Korean true crime channels. They would then go through her phone and her laptop, and they would find again that Yoo Jung was a very, very lonely person. She had no incoming or outgoing calls or messages from anybody. It really seemed like she was living in her own little world in her apartment. She didn't have anybody to speak with and had no friends. I don't even believe that she was regularly speaking to her grandfather. So she really was living like a hermit. And what was even more concerning to the authorities was the research that she was doing on her laptop. Yoo Jung's browser history was just filled with research on different types of ways or methods to kill somebody and how to get away with it. Authorities even discovered that Yoo Jung had been analyzing old cases and looking through like old crime scene photos. And when she did leave the house, she would leave to go to old crime scenes and to take photos and, I don't know, do whatever she was doing there. She was completely obsessed with true crime and not in a good way. That's all I have to say. Not in a good way. So when Yoo Jung was initially arrested, she denied that she was the one to murder the victim. She told the authorities that actually somebody else had committed the murder, but they threatened to murder me if I didn't help them get rid of the body. Luckily, the police didn't even entertain the statement because at this point there was just so much evidence stacked up against Yoo Jung and it all pointed to her as the murderer. So luckily they didn't believe her statement and they were like, yeah, no, we're gonna take you in, you're in jail, like you definitely murdered this person. This is what's happened and we're calling BS. And that's what they did. Yoo Jung would only end up confessing to the murder about 3 days after her arrest and only after her family had come in to see her and had begged her to just tell the world the truth. So during the confession, the detectives would say to her like, okay, you've confessed to the murder. So why did you do it? During her confession, Yoo Jung would shock the detectives or the investigators by telling them that she had this uncontrollable urge to kill. The detectives would say, what do you mean? And she would tell them that she had murdered her victim because she was curious. She actually had nothing against this victim. She didn't even know the victim. She wasn't even mad at the victim. She quite literally just wanted to know what it felt like to take away someone's life. So that was her reasoning. She wanted to know what it would be like to murder somebody and ended up committing this crime out of curiosity. Now, also as a side note, due to South Korea's strict privacy laws, both the victim's name and face has not been released to the public. It will not be shared with the public at all, so nobody has this information except the people involved in the case. Let's talk about the events leading up to the crime itself. According to Yoo Jung's statement, in her confession to the authorities, she had been planning for this murder for about 3 months prior to the day of the crime. And because she had no personal motive, Yoo Jung figured that it would be best if the victim was just a random stranger. And because she didn't have a social circle and didn't have any friends or anybody that she spoke with, she figured that it would probably be easiest for her to find somebody online. That way she wouldn't have to go through the whole process of going out and talking to somebody and then trying to like lure them back into her home to murder them. So she decided that, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sign up for something online, meet somebody that way, and then meet them in person and then carry out the crime. This is when Yoo Jung would sign up for a online tutoring application that essentially connects parents to tutors for their children. She would sign up onto the platform posing as a mother to a 9th grader. Soon after, the app would match her to a tutor and she would reach out to the tutor and say like, hey, before we start the sessions, can I please meet you in person? And this way you can also meet my daughter. And the tutor would agree and they would schedule a date to meet in person. And on May 26, 2023, Yoo Jung would dress herself up in a schoolgirl's outfit and she would make her way over to her tutor's apartment. Yoo Jung is pretty short, so she figured that, okay, like if I'm dressed in a schoolgirl's outfit, maybe I'll pass for a student. And when Yoo Jung arrives at the tutor's apartment, she would knock on the door and the tutor would come to the door and greet her and then invite her into her home. I assume the tutor slash victim mistook Yoo Jung to be a student because, again, she would invite Yoo Jung in and Yoo Jung would step into the house and they would make small talk and Yoo Jung would ask the tutor like, oh, do you live here with your family or with anybody? And the tutor would say, oh no, I live here alone. And that is when Yoo Jung would pull out a knife that she had hidden in her schoolgirl's uniform and she would begin stabbing the tutor. The stabbings were fatal and Yoo Jung's wicked mission was successful. She would then leave the apartment to go to a store located at the corner of the block, and she would go in and purchase bleach as well as plastic bags. And before heading back to the victim's apartment, Yoo Jung would head over to her own home and she would go and pick up a suitcase. Now, what's really disturbing is that in the footage of her moving the suitcase around on the street, her demeanor comes off as almost happy. It's like she's excited and doesn't seem at all fazed by the fact that she just murdered someone. And when she returns to the victim's apartment, she would take the victim's wallet and ID and stash them in her pockets, and then she would begin dismembering the victim's body. After she finishes dismembering the body, she would begin placing the body parts into the suitcase and would then leave the apartment with that suitcase. Yoo Jung's plan would quickly start falling apart after she begins making a series of mistakes. The first being that she hailed a taxi in the middle of the night, well, I guess at 3 a.m., so early hours, and she gets into this taxi with a suitcase filled with mutilated remains of a person she has just murdered. And the second mistake that she made was bringing back to her own home blood-stained clothing belonging to the victim, as well as a few body parts. Now, even if she had avoided the first and second mistakes, I still don't believe that she would have gotten away with it in the end. Yoo Jung's DNA was found everywhere in her victim's apartment. She did try to clean the apartment up with bleach, but it looks like she didn't do a good job of it. So she would have been caught in the end anyways. And also, don't forget that there was surveillance footage from that night of her going to the store, buying bleach in the plastic bags, and then coming and going with a suitcase. Her plan of committing the perfect crime failed miserably. Now, when doing my research and watching videos from other content creators who had covered this case, I came upon the theory that Yoo Jung had actually targeted this specific tutor because she was jealous of this tutor. Now, do you remember how I mentioned earlier in this video that Yoo Jung was struggling to pass the civil service exam, which was problematic because she really wanted to become a civil servant officer or to work in the civil service industry? Well, her victim had passed the civil service exam and was an English major from a very prestigious university in South Korea. Her victim had a good social status and on top of that had a great academic background. So many people in South Korea believed that this crime was intentional because Yoo Jung was envious of the victim's life. However, this hasn't been confirmed because again, Yoo Jung does say that she had no personal motive against the victim and that she literally just wanted to kill somebody because she wanted to know what that would feel like. But it does kind of make sense because Yoo Jung was actually matched on the platform to a number of different tutors, but she did choose this specific tutor. So maybe she chose this specific tutor for the reasons that we mentioned just now. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the video as well, when Yoo Jung was initially arrested, she did deny the murder. She even tried to delay her arrest by telling the officers that she was injured and was bleeding internally. And the officers would take her to the hospital and would get her checked up, and the doctors would tell them, no, like, she's completely fine. There's nothing wrong with her. Authorities would also then look into Yoo Jung's mental records, and they found that she was never diagnosed or flagged with any mental illnesses. She also had a really clean criminal record, and her family was just so shocked to discover that Yoo Jung had done this. They couldn't believe that she was capable of such a dark crime. Sure, she was a loner and exhibited peculiar behaviors, but her family said that they never ever saw any signs of such darkness within Yoo Jung. I also just want to state that yes, she was obsessed with true crime. However, I don't think that's necessarily a flag. Well, in this case, it was a flag, but generally it's not because everybody on this channel who's watching this video, you guys are obsessed with true crime, and there's a lot of people in the world who are also obsessed with true crime. Fascination with the topic doesn't necessarily translate to us being murderers or being evil. We're just fascinated with this genre. Now, South Korea has a 4-factor psychopath diagnostic test, and this is essentially a test that determines how likely somebody is to be a psychopath. An individual is considered to be a psychopath when they take this test and they score 25 points, while Yoo Jung, when she took this test, she scored 28 points. I mean, I honestly do believe that Yoo Jung is a psychopath. Who kills somebody because they're curious and they want to know what taking a life feels like? That to me sounds like a psychopath. So in June of 2023, Yoo Jung would go and stand outside the police station that she was taken into custody in, and she would profusely apologize to the media and to the victim's family for her crimes.
피해자는 유가족께 할 말 없습니까?
피해자와 유가족분들에게 저는 진심으로 죄송합니다. 제정신이 아니었던 것 같습니다. 죄송합니다.
So, due to how recent this case is, there hasn't been a trial date set for Yoo Jung yet. She is still being psychologically examined, and the exact charges for her are still being determined. I believe they won't confirm the exact charges until the mental examination has been completed, which makes sense because maybe they will try to plead insanity. Who knows? I think all of us, we're all gonna need to stay tuned and see what happens together. Yoo Jung's actions really shocked the nation, and after what she did came to light, almost everybody on the online tutoring application platform rushed to delete their accounts because they no longer feel safe to be on the platform. I mean, people are definitely terrified. It was such a random act of pure evil, and I honestly feel so bad for the victim and the victim's family. The reason that Yoo Jung gave for this murder, or the motive behind it, it was just, it blows my mind. It's just so senseless. This woman should definitely not be released. So hopefully this will be a fair trial for the victim's family and the victim will get some justice. I'll be sharing more information about this case on my Twitter, which I will link somewhere here, and I will be sure to share it there once more information is released. But for now, thank you so much for tuning in. This is my first video in a really long time, so I'm getting back into the groove of things. And yeah, I'm super excited to continue to share more stories with you guys. And if you have any case recommendations, please shoot them through to truecrime@gmail.com. And please don't forget to stay tuned for my future uploads, and also don't forget to leave your comments or your thoughts in the comments about what you think about the Jung Yoo Jung case. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and have a wonderful week ahead. Bye!